I'm Leslie Campbell, and welcome to this episode of Soundcheck. Today, I'm joined by Zack Frazier, one of our Salesforce developers here at Virtuoso. Welcome, Zack. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So today, we want to talk about different things that new admins and new developers should know. So, Zack, why don't you tell me about your experience when you first became a Salesforce developer? What types of things did you go through? What was it like learning Salesforce, and how did you actually learn it?
So I started off as a React developer for a small startup back in Maryland. And this was during college. It was my last year. I did a year there. And then after graduation, I went to a Salesforce coding boot camp. And there I got my admin cert, my developer cert, and then they allowed me to get a third one, although it wasn't like proper. So I went for the JavaScript developer cert because that was easy coming in from React.
What do you mean it wasn't proper?
Because properly they only like train you for the admin and developer cert.
Oh, okay.
But I already knew JavaScript. I didn't have to study for that one, so I was like, yeah, why not?
Okay.
It's right there. So they covered that exam, and I got that certification also.
Cool.
Yeah.
So then you got your first job did you go in right away as a Salesforce developer?
Yeah.
So what was it like in those first months of, okay, so you went through this boot camp and you're learning things, and they give you scenarios. It's not necessarily 100% like a real life scenarios, but so you have all this training, but you haven't actually used it. What was it like in your first month or two on the job as a new Salesforce developer?
Oh, it was absolutely a challenge. They would throw a lot of things, because one of the first things I learned is, although I learned how to do a lot of stuff out of the box, the company that I worked for didn't want a lot of things out of the box. They wanted everything custom.
Okay.
One of the tricky things that I had to learn was how to take advantage of what's already there and augment it rather than building everything from scratch.
So they really did they want you to skip the declarative stuff and go right into coding?
I would say it's more accurate to say they would just say, hey, we want this. And it would always be some wild custom thing. And they didn't necessarily care how I did it.
Okay.
So it was on me to figure out how to do that with the least amount of pain points and the least amount of challenge, using as much out of the box as I could, and then adding customizations when needed.
And so did you ever find yourself in those first few months getting asked to do something and not knowing how to do it? And if so, how did you figure out how to do it?
Oh, yeah, of course. All the time. That still happens.
Yeah. I can vouch for that. I still have to look stuff up sometimes.
I figured it out basically through my own research and then trying to iron it down. So usually when I go to make something new, I'll go through a process of how much of this can I do with, say, a flow as opposed to writing Apex?
Okay.
How much of this can I do with a screen flow as opposed to doing LWCs?
Mm-hmm.
And once I work that out, maybe I can get 70% of the way there, and then I'll add, say, the LWC, the Apex, what have you, the developer customizations afterwards, to basically try and fill the gap.
Okay. And for the new developers and admins out there, LWC is Lightning Web Component. Okay, cool. Anything else you want to say about that, startup in Salesforce and that experience?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay. Well, my start to Salesforce was back in 2006. It was before Process Builder, before Flows. It was before Trailhead, because Trailhead I don't think came into play until 2014. So I was working for a company that decided they wanted to purchase this CRM tool just really to handle their sales and their leads and accounts. And I was in marketing, and my boss came to me and said, we're purchasing licenses for this new CRM tool, and oh, by the way, you are going to be the system admin, and also, by the way, we're not paying for any training for you. You're going to have to learn it you're going to have to learn it on your own. What Salesforce did offer, excuse me, at that time was a 2-day like, I don't want to say webinar because it wasn't pre-recorded, but it was like a live conference call almost because it was so long ago. And it was for new admins, but they really just went through the very basic stuff. So it was obviously all in Classic because of the time, but how to get to set up, what profiles were, how to set up a new user, how to create a field, page layouts, just the very basics. And it was enough to get me started, but I really had to struggle through learning how to do this because, like I said, there wasn't Trailhead. Salesforce itself was only about, I think, around 6 years old at that time, so there wasn't a huge community of people who had gone through all of these, who had gone through issues and posted about it online. So it was definitely a challenge, but it, got me, it was a good enough challenge to get me to really enjoy working with Salesforce. All right, let's move on to the next topic. So let's just help some of the new admins and new developers out there get some insight as to maybe some hacks that they don't know about, things that aren't obvious in Salesforce, maybe some tips on certain things that they should do. So do you want to start talking about some cool things that developers might need to know or be useful that, they're maybe not obvious in Salesforce?
Absolutely. So I'd say one of the most interesting ones that a lot of people don't know, and I believe a lot of people don't know about it because originally it wasn't a feature so much as someone discovered you could do this and it was really useful, so Salesforce decided, hey, it's not a bug, it's a feature now. That would be URL hacks for reports.
Okay.
Now let's say you want a dynamic report where depending who clicks on it, it'll show different information.
Okay.
So you can there's two ways to do this. The old way to do this is you use the PV0, PV1, PV2 variables in the URL, and those are basically filter values. They are values that will go into your predefined filters, and you can change the values dynamically.
So what would be an example of one of those?
One example would be, let's say you want to see a report, but you want to filter it by name and have the name be whoever is currently clicking on it.
Okay.
You could populate the filter value there to be, let's say you're building the URL in a flow. Mm-hmm. You can just dynamically set it from there to say, hey, PV1 equals the current user's username, and then have that filter for that PV1 value be only show tasks for this specific username.
So how is that different than setting up the report in standard Salesforce with a filter for my tasks?
You can do a lot more dynamic things with it because you can set any filter to any value.
Okay.
So that's just one example. But let's say you have a report on birthdays, for example, and you want to show birthdays in the same month as the person who's currently viewing it.
So if that person who's viewing it, if their birthday is stored somewhere in Salesforce, then it's going to recognize, okay, their birthday's in March. So now I'm going to pull all these records where other birthdays are in March.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
You could set something up like that. There's a new way to do it also, although the new way I noticed is a little bit confusing, but it seems to be like the proper way to go about it now.
And what's that?
With the new way, you can specify a URL parameter called, I believe it was filter value, and that one will just legitimately let you add new filters through the URL, and it takes like a JSON string. That might be a bit more complicated. Mm-hmm. And I did notice it's a little unclear how to set the fields directly, but that is like a new, more modern way to do it. And I'm sure that's going to get more documented with time.
Okay. What about another hack?
It was recently announced that Salesforce is going to be eliminating the object and field level permissions on profiles.
Yeah, that's happening in 2026, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So one hack that I found recently is it's actually, you'd have to likely be a developer to pull this one off, but you can pull in the profile with SFDX, and then it's very easy to just edit the metadata and turn it into a permission set, because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to move all these permissions to just be permission sets. Mm-hmm. And then you can just assign that permission set out or put it in a permission set group or what have you.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense. And in my opinion, permission sets seem to be a little bit easier to work with than profiles anyway, because, you can just go to the permission set and that's one permission set or maybe a couple of permission sets. But if you have a lot of profiles and you have to edit something that is on every profile, that could be pretty time consuming.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Especially since migrating profiles from one org to another can be nearly impossible sometimes.
Yeah.
Whenever I've had to do any development work with profiles, I usually do that as like a post-deployment step, as in I will go in after I do my deployment and then just edit the profile manually, because it does not move cleanly.
Okay. How about another hack?
So let's say you've created a flow and you want it to link to maybe some record in your site. But when you move that, say, from your sandbox to production, they're going to have different site URLs.
That's right.
So one of the things you can do is there's a variable in the flow called API dot, there's a couple of them. It'll be like partner service 370, stuff like that. You can actually use that to get the base URL for your site dynamically. And then when you migrate that over, it still knows what the base URL is. That variable is just going to be something different in production, but it can still work that out. And you basically just set it up as a formula in the flow to just get the base URL out of it.
Okay.
And then you can use that for your link.
I think there's something like that when you're creating a button too. Like when you go into the field where you would put the URL, there's an option to choose the site URL. And then you put your formula after that.
Yeah, like what we do with Conga, for example, one of their query parameters to have it work is like server URL. There you will like pass in API.partner. It's like API.partner server 370, something like that. That's another example of like that same variable. It's actually the same variable in that case, it's a quick action.
Yeah.
But in the flow, it's the exact same thing.
Cool.
You access it a little differently.
Okay. Any other hacks you want to talk about?
Yeah, sure. I got plenty.
Okay, let's keep it going.
Okay, so this is one that killed me a little bit. So with experience sites, let's say you don't want chatter enabled for anyone who's using the site.
Yeah.
But the record detail page, by default, if you're just using the standard page with the record information tabs, will have a chatter tab on not a tab, but like a section for chatter on the side. And if they don't have chatter enabled, it just says, oh, chatter is not enabled.
Yeah, I've seen that.
So what you can do is switch that out with just a tabs, have a record detail on one tab, and then a related list on the other.
Okay.
And that creates more or less the same functionality. However, it looks like a bug in the Salesforce UI. So, those little tooltips with like the little eye for information?
Yeah.
You put your mouse over it. They will show up like right next to the field whenever it's in the record detail page. I don't know that that's true like across every single Experience Cloud template, what have you, but I know I've seen 2 or 3 of them where it's the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So there's actually a CSS hack you can do to fix that. You can grab the CSS class on the field like as a unique identifier. And then you can set the padding, which is just like the distance between two things, more or less, and set that to like half a rem, where rem is like the root element. So that'll be like 8 pixels basically. But it can vary from like your phone, a rem would be a different thing than it would be on your desktop. So my go-to is just like half a rem, so it's consistent across all devices, and that will like fix the issue.
Okay.
Sorry if I got a little too technical there.
No, that's okay. Did I look like I was falling asleep or like
Oh no,
off in Wonderland?
You're good.
No, it's cool. It's cool to hear this. What about another one? I like that you were prepared and made notes on your hacks.
Okay, a really good one. So for whatever reason, Salesforce hasn't quite updated list view buttons in the same way record detail buttons are. So a record detail button, you can just set the action to just say go straight to a flow, and then the flow will pop up in a nice little modal, and that's very nice. List view actions aren't quite as clean. You only got 4 options. It's like you can send it to something called an S controller. I have no idea what that is, and I've never met anyone who does.
Okay.
I'm sure there's someone out there who does.
Okay.
You can send it to a visual force page. You can have it execute arbitrary JavaScript, or you can send it to a URL. So let's say what you want is from the list view, you want to launch some sort of flow.
Mm-hmm.
What you can do is you go into the flow and you look at the actual record. Like, you don't open it up in Flow Builder, but you look at the actual record and you can get the URL for the flow. And you can set the list view button to URL and pass in that URL, and that's how you can jump to the flow.
Right.
And then there's a query parameter you can have. It was a bit of a trip to find because it's not super well out there, but it's called ret URL, or like return URL.
Yeah.
And that can be set dynamically to, like, say, the record ID. Well, I guess it wouldn't be the record ID, but you can set it back to the list view. So that way when you complete the flow, it'll jump you right back to it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right. I think we probably have time for one more.
Okay, this one could actually save you money, so I'm going to go with this one.
Oh, okay. I like to save money. I'm sure everybody out there who's watching likes to save money.
Yeah, so back in the day, I was on a project where we wanted to send a survey. Just one survey that we could send out to people to get, like, feedback. Now, Salesforce is really good at having a survey builder. It's a nice little tool that you can use. It is, well, I mean, it's good at, like, coming back with, like, the information, aggregating the results, if you pay a couple $1,000s.
Yeah, I was going to say the surveys aren't free. I think you get like 1 to 3 surveys or something that are free.
Yeah, so, like, if you just want one survey, the hard part, of course, is going to be actually seeing the results.
Okay.
So what I discovered back then, because we weren't trying to spend thousands of dollars on this, like, shoestring budget project.
Right, and if you just need it for, one thing, that's different. It's different if your company's sending out surveys regularly and you need that
Exactly.
functionality.
Yeah. So I feel like maybe a smaller company or something, you just need, like, one survey, or even if it's just, for whatever reason, you need a survey, just one survey right now, but you don't need a ton of them. What you can do, or what an admin or developer could do, is put a flow on the aggregate. It's not called aggregate results, but it's like something like survey results, survey response. And then what I did back then was I numbered each question.
Okay.
That's just adding a number into the question text.
Okay.
So that way you can retain the order of them of the aggregate results when they're created.
Was that in just the API name of the field, or was
not
it in
even
the label?
API name. This was very much a hack trying to make this work.
Okay.
So it was literally just in the text of the question.
Okay.
So how it worked was you can go through all of the question responses that are created and then aggregate them yourself with this flow. It took me about 2 days. It might take someone a little longer if they're, like, newer to Flow Builder or what have you. But we got that working, and then we were able to aggregate it into a single object that displayed all the results. And that was how we were able to aggregate the results of the survey, and then you number it so you can actually record the order of the numbering, so when you play them back to people, you can know, like, it just shows up a little nicer, basically.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. So we're getting close to running out of time, but what's some advice that you would give to newer developers when it comes to using Salesforce? Maybe 3 to 5 different things that you would tell a new developer.
I would say the first thing is remember that Salesforce is clicks, not code.
That's right. That's very helpful. And if you're working with a consulting partner, it's important to talk to that partner about wanting them to do clicks versus code, because the more declarative work a partner does, the less dependent you are on them, because if it's declarative and not code, then it's easier to fix. So
Yeah.
that's a great tip.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if, say, you have you're working with, say, a consulting partner, and you have an admin but not a developer on board. If they're just making Flow Builder, your admin can go in and look at that. They
Right.
can figure that out. But if you don't have a developer on board, they're not going to be able to go into the code and see what it does.
Right.
I mean, in theory, they could look at it, but they're probably not going to be able to figure it out.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a good thing to know, especially also as a developer, taking into account that Apex test classes can be very iffy sometimes. With, say, a flow, though, you don't have that issue. You can deploy a flow. You don't need to make a test class. You don't need code coverage, all that. The flow itself is good. I mean, still test your flow, of course, but
Yeah.
it's not going to, there's no hard lock that's going to stop you from pushing a simple flow from your sandbox to production. Speaking of, I'd say number 2 is definitely to get super well acquainted with Flow Builder.
Yeah.
Because Flow Builder is getting to a point where it can do almost anything Apex does. You just make those record-triggered flows. There's maybe 1 or 2 things it's still not quite there yet, and there's a few things where using code in Apex would just be easier. However, for most things, Flow gets the job done.
Yeah.
And then also with, say, a screen flow, let's say you're doing custom front-end development like Lightning Web Components, or maybe an Aura component if you're still working with those. One of the nice things you can do is with the screen flow, that already gives you like a base card to work with, a lot of UI built out of the box, and that back and forth functionality already. You don't have to implement that.
Yeah.
You can just build your web component or what have you, and just put that on the flow and work with that.
Yeah, and the Lightning Web Components and the screen flows, they're really cool because they kind of get you away from having to go to the standard Salesforce creation page where you're clicking on new record and you're possibly entering a ton of fields. It's nice because they can just walk you through the steps that are necessary, or they can walk your users through different things and give advice on what your users should be putting in there and, helping them. So it's kind of a better user experience in some cases.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you got, say, 40 fields on an object, but when you actually create one of the records, you need like 5 of them filled out.
Right.
Yeah. Just pop up a flow with those 5 and
Yeah.
you're good.
And what would be your third piece of advice?
A third piece of advice would be get really comfortable with Experience Builder. I've never worked with, for those who don't know, Experience Builder it's a part of Experience Cloud. It is how you can build websites tied to your Salesforce org. So I've never worked with anyone who didn't want a website or have a website just to get that extra, public visibility, or maybe even just to provide extra ways to interact with their customers or clients. And there's a lot of built-in customizations that can be used. So I would say that's my number 3. Just get really good with Experience Builder. You cannot go wrong with that.
Cool. I'd say for new admins, it's probably a really good idea to really lean on My Trailhead. It's a great tool. Like I said before, My Trailhead wasn't around when I started, and Salesforce has really made it possible for anybody to learn pretty much everything you need to know about Salesforce. There was a lot of reading involved, and there are a lot of modules, but it can really be a helpful tool. And also reach out to and pay attention to the Trailblazer community, because chances are, if you're running into a problem or you need something, you're not the first person who's needed it. And it's amazing what you'll find on the Trailblazer community. People post questions all the time, and other people post answers to that questions. And it's really a cool thing to see, because a lot of people, they just obviously really want to help others learn Salesforce and utilize it the right way. And I've seen some responses from people responding to questions, like really detailed responses, giving long formulas, and just really putting a lot of effort into answering those questions. So definitely utilize the Trailblazer community. Always utilize a sandbox. Sandbox is a playground testing environment where you can create something, do some sort of customization, and you can test it out. And if you completely screw it up, you're not going to mess your system up. You're not going to do anything with your actual data, because your actual data is in production. So,
Speaking from experience, yes.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of bad things happen accidentally from people in production. I would also say pay attention to release notes. So Salesforce pushes out a new release 3 times a year. And what they do is they have all their own development plans, but through the ideas community, people post ideas all the time. Hey, we can't do this in Salesforce, and it would be really helpful to be able to do this. And other people comment on it about how needed it is, and you can upvote it. And once it reaches a certain number of votes, then Salesforce reviews it and considers it. And if they decide they want to put that functionality in, they'll put it in, and then it'll get released in one of those releases. And so you may be struggling with something that you can't do in Salesforce, but Salesforce might be working on that. And in the next release, it might be available. And if you don't pay attention to the release notes, you may be missing out on functionality that you need, that you've been wanting, that's been available, but you just didn't know about it because you didn't pay attention to the release notes. So those are really important. They can get really long. They're like hundreds of pages.
Yeah.
Luckily, we have someone here who reads through all of our release notes and finds things that pertain to us and our clients. But release notes are really important. And then you already said it, but I just want to reiterate it. Learning flows, that's really important. Admins out there, you can do so much with flows, and you don't have to be a coder. You don't have to be a developer. But workflow rules are done, process builder is on its way out, and flows are really the way of the future. And it's pretty amazing what you can do in flows. So, all right. So thank you so much, Zack, for your time today. It's been really helpful. Hopefully,
Thanks for having me.
thanks. Hopefully you've found this helpful. And we will see you on the next episode of Soundcheck. Thank you.